My husband texted me that he was stuck at work on the night of our 5th wedding anniversary. I read his message while sitting exactly 2 tables away, watching him passionately kiss another woman. That woman was my former college sorority sister. Just as I stood up ready to flip the table and cause a massive scene, a stranger grabbed my arm. He pulled me into the shadows and whispered for me to stay calm because the real show was just about to begin. What he revealed next made my blood run cold. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to smile through a betrayal while planning your ultimate revenge. My name is Maya Caldwell. I am 33 years old and a forensic accountant by trade. I grew up in an affluent, image-obsessed African American community in Atlanta, where keeping up appearances was always more important than actual happiness. Inside our sprawling home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. My childhood was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight A grades, joined honor societies, and pledged a prestigious sorority, all to earn the approval of my family and peers. I thought I had escaped that toxic cycle of seeking validation when I met Julian. Julian was 35, a polished and ambitious wealth manager. He wore custom suits, drove a luxury car, and knew exactly what to say to make me feel like I was the center of his universe. When we got married 5 years ago, my mother-in-law Beatrice made it abundantly clear that she felt I was not good enough for her golden child. Beatrice lived for country club politics, exclusive social events, and high society optics. She constantly belittled my practical career and my natural hair, reminding me that I did not come from old money. She wanted Julian to marry a pageant queen, not a woman who analyzed financial spreadsheets for a living. I ignored her cruelty because I believed Julian and I were an unbreakable team. I spent the first 3 years of our marriage working 80-hour weeks to pay off his massive student loan debt from his Master of Business Administration degree. I funded our lifestyle while he built his client list, trusting that my sacrifices were an investment in our shared future. I even tolerated his entitled sister Tasha and her lazy husband Darnell, who constantly demanded financial favors from us to fund their own lavish lifestyle. I was completely blind to the monster I was actually funding. It was a rainy Friday evening. I was sitting inside Le Petit Chateau, one of the most exclusive and low-lit French restaurants in the city. The ambiance was designed for romance, with soft jazz playing in the background and flickering candlelight reflecting off the crystal glasses. I was wearing a stunning black silk dress I had bought specifically for our 5th anniversary dinner. The waiter had already refilled my water glass 3 times, casting sympathetic glances my way. The reservation was for 7 o'clock. It was now almost 8. I pulled my phone from my clutch, preparing to call him, when the screen lit up with a new message from Julian. The text read that he was so sorry, but he was stuck at the firm dealing with a massive client crisis. He wished me a happy 5th wedding anniversary and promised to make it up to me this weekend, ending the message by saying he loved me. A wave of disappointment washed over me, followed immediately by a sharp sting of guilt. I told myself he was working hard for our future. I typed out a sweet, understanding reply assuring him that I loved him and that work came first. I signaled the waiter to bring the check for my single glass of wine. As I turned my head toward the entrance of the restaurant, the breath left my lungs entirely. Walking through the heavy oak doors was Julian. He was not wearing his usual stiff business attire. He looked relaxed, handsome, and completely carefree. But he was not alone. Clinging to his arm, wearing a skin-tight red dress and laughing loudly at something he said, was Chloe Sterling. Chloe was a luxury real estate agent and, sickeningly enough, my former sorority sister from college. She was the kind of woman who thrived on silent competition, always needing to have the best designer bags and the wealthiest men. We had drifted apart over the years, but she still attended the same social events hosted by my mother-in-law. I froze completely. I watched as the host led them to a secluded booth just 2 tables away from where I was sitting. The restaurant was dark enough that I was hidden in the shadows, but I had a perfect, unobstructed view of them. Julian pulled out her chair like a perfect gentleman. As she sat down, he leaned in and kissed her. It was not a friendly peck. It was a deep, passionate, Familiar kiss that spoke of months, maybe years of hidden intimacy. The betrayal hit me with the force of a physical blow. The air in the room suddenly felt too thick to breathe. My ears started ringing. All those late nights he claimed to be at the office. All those sudden weekend business trips. All the times Chloe had smiled at me at charity galas and asked how married life was treating me. It was all a sick, twisted joke, and I was the punchline. Hot, blinding anger erupted in my chest. Every sacrifice I had ever made for this man flashed before my eyes. The student loans I paid off for him. The disrespect I swallowed from his mother. The exhausting hours I worked so he could maintain his flashy image. I gripped the stem of my wineglass so tightly I thought the glass would shatter in my hand. The urge to cause a scene was overwhelming. I wanted to march over to that table, pour my red wine over his expensive white shirt, and drag Chloe out of the booth by her hair. I wanted the entire restaurant to see exactly what kind of man Julian Caldwell really was. I pushed my chair back, my heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. My vision tunneled, focused entirely on the cheating couple laughing over the menu. I took one step forward, my muscles coiled with rage. Before I could take a second step, a large, warm hand clamped down hard on my forearm. I gasped and spun around, ready to yell at whoever was touching me. Standing there was a tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark suit. He looked to be in his late 30s, with sharp, assessing eyes and a demeanor that radiated absolute authority. He stepped into my personal space, blocking my view of Julian and Chloe. "Do not do it," he whispered, his voice low and commanding. I hissed at him to excuse me, trying to yank my arm away. I told him to let go of me right now because that was my husband sitting over there. The man did not let go. Instead, he smoothly angled his body to shield me from the rest of the room. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a leather wallet, flipping it open just enough for me to see the heavy gold shield pinned inside. Federal Bureau of Investigation. He quietly introduced himself as Special Agent Desmond Pierce. He told me that if I walked over to that table right now, I was going to federal prison instead of my husband. My anger evaporated instantly, replaced by a chilling wave of confusion. I demanded to know what he was talking about, glancing nervously around the restaurant. Desmond pulled me gently but firmly into a quiet, unoccupied alcove near the coat check room, far out of sight from Julian and his mistress. He explained that my husband and Chloe Sterling were not just having an affair. They were partners in a massive financial crime ring. I stared at him, my forensic accountant brain struggling to process the words. Julian was arrogant and selfish, but a federal criminal. Desmond continued, stating that they had been stealing millions of dollars from Julian's wealthiest clients. But Julian was not stupid. He knew the Internal Revenue Service and the FBI would eventually notice the missing funds. So he and Chloe created an elaborate offshore shell company to launder the stolen money. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I asked him why that involved me going to prison. Desmond looked at me with a mixture of pity and grim seriousness. He told me it was because Julian forged my signature. He used my pristine credit history, my social security number, and my professional credentials as a forensic accountant to register the limited liability company. On paper, Maya Caldwell was the sole owner and primary beneficiary of the offshore accounts located in the Cayman Islands. Chloe acted as the notary and witness to my forged signatures. They funneled the stolen capital through real estate acquisitions, making it look like legitimate business transactions. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. I braced my hand against the flocked wallpaper to steady myself. The implications crashed over me with terrifying clarity. Julian had not just broken my heart. He had weaponized my identity to shield his own cowardice. If the federal government raided that company right now, all the digital paper trails would lead directly to me. I would be arrested for federal wire fraud, money laundering, and identity theft. I could face 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Julian and Chloe would simply claim they knew nothing about it, leaving me to take the fall while they lived off the stolen millions in some tropical paradise. Desmond leaned in close and told me I needed to listen very carefully. The Bureau had been building a case against Julian for 8 months, but he had covered his tracks perfectly. The only link to the stolen money was me. If I caused a scene tonight and alerted him that I knew about Chloe, he would panic. He would destroy the physical evidence on his laptop, transfer the remaining funds, and trigger the protocol that officially pinned the entire fraud operation on me. The authorities would have no choice but to arrest me. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath. The image of Julian kissing Chloe flashed in my mind again, but the hot, irrational anger was gone. It was replaced by an absolute freezing calm. I was not just a betrayed wife anymore. I was a professional investigator who tracked missing money for a living. And my own husband had just made me the mark. I opened my eyes to meet Desmond's gaze and asked him what he needed me to do. Desmond instructed me to go home. He told me I needed to smile when Julian walked through the door. I needed to play the role of the clueless, devoted wife. He asked if I could do that. I looked past Desmond's shoulder, catching a brief glimpse of Julian raising his glass in a toast with Chloe. A dark, bitter resolve settled into my bones. Julian thought I was just a naive woman who was lucky to have him. He had severely underestimated my intelligence, my resilience, and my capacity for vengeance. I told Desmond I could do much more than that. I promised, with a voice that was steady and cold, that I was going to tear his entire life apart from the inside out. Desmond handed me a plain white business card with a single phone number printed on it. He told me to call him tomorrow from a secure line and welcomed me to the team. I slipped the card into my clutch, smoothed down the fabric of my dress, and walked out the side door of the restaurant into the rainy night. The woman who had walked into that restaurant expecting a romantic anniversary dinner was dead. The woman walking out was a predator, and the hunt had just begun. The drive back to our sprawling estate was a blur of torrential rain and glaring streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement. The rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers sounded exactly like the ticking of a metronome, pacing the rapid financial calculations firing across my brain. I did not shed a single tear during the 30-minute commute. Crying was a luxury reserved for women who had the privilege of simply being heartbroken. I was a Black woman navigating a high-stakes financial war, and I had just been handed the most dangerous assignment of my life. My mind automatically shifted gears, completely shutting down my emotional responses. I locked away the image of Julian kissing Chloe in a dark, airtight compartment of my psyche, replacing the devastated wife with the cold, calculating forensic accountant. I mapped out the architecture of my husband's deception, analyzing the variables. As I navigated the winding, affluent suburban roads, the bitter irony of our entire marriage washed over me like a suffocating wave. I thought about the first 3 agonizing years we were married. I worked grueling 80-hour weeks at a demanding downtown accounting firm, scrutinizing balance sheets and cross-referencing ledgers until my vision literally blurred. Every bonus check I received, every promotion I earned, and every extra dollar I saved went directly toward paying off Julian's staggering student loans from his elite Master of Business Administration program. I sacrificed my own comfort, skipping vacations and wearing budget clothing to ensure he could walk into his prestigious wealth management firm without the crushing weight of educational debt dragging him down. I believed I was building a solid foundation for our future family, trusting his promises of a true partnership. Yet whenever we attended those lavish networking galas or exclusive social events hosted by his incredibly judgmental mother, Beatrice Julian would stand in a circle of affluent men, holding a glass of expensive scotch, and boast about how he provided everything for his household. He told his elite colleagues that he had essentially retired his wife, actively painting me as the quiet, supportive spouse who occasionally crunched numbers just for fun. He completely erased my massive financial contributions to his early success. I had allowed him to steal my credit and my labor to build his polished, wealthy facade. I had been the silent, exhausted architect of his empire, and he had rewarded my unwavering loyalty by turning my very identity into a weapon. I pulled my car into the garage and immediately stripped off my black silk anniversary dress the moment I walked through the door. I wiped the carefully applied makeup from my face, washing away any trace of the rainy night, and slipped into my most comfortable silk pajamas. I sat down in the dark living room, a cup of chamomile tea growing increasingly cold in my hands, waiting patiently for the nightly performance to begin. At exactly 1 o'clock in the morning, the heavy oak front door clicked open. Julian walked in, loosening his silk tie and letting his expensive leather briefcase drop to the hardwood floor with a heavy, dramatic thud. He rubbed his temples with his fingertips, portraying the very picture of a deeply exhausted corporate martyr carrying the weight of the world. He did not know I was sitting in the shadows until I turned on the small reading lamp next to my chair. He flinched violently, a flash of genuine panic crossing his features, before he instantly smoothed his expression into a tired, apologetic smile. As he walked over to me, the distinct musky floral scent of Chloe's signature expensive perfume hit me like a physical blow, heavily layered beneath the sharp smell of premium bourbon. He kissed the top of my head and sighed heavily, rubbing my shoulders with fake affection. He told me the stock market had been an absolute nightmare today, and that he had spent the last 6 hours talking a major client off a financial ledge. He apologized profusely for missing our milestone anniversary dinner, his voice dripping with practiced manipulative sincerity. He said he felt like the absolute worst husband in the world. I looked up at him, keeping my expression perfectly soft and understanding. I reached out and gently squeezed his hand, telling him I completely understood that his high-profile career carried massive responsibilities. I told him he worked so hard to give us this beautiful, comfortable life, and I could never be angry at him for being dedicated to his clients. My stomach churned with violent disgust at my own submissive words, but my voice remained as smooth and clear as glass. Julian exhaled loudly, clearly relieved that he had managed to pacify his supposedly naive wife so easily. He reached into his tailored suit jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He handed it to me, claiming he had managed to have his assistant pick it up earlier in the day because he could not let our 5-year milestone pass without a token of his deep appreciation. I opened the velvet box. Resting on the cheap satin lining was a generic thin gold-plated chain featuring a tiny, visibly flawed cubic zirconia pendant. It was an absolute afterthought. It was a gilt purchase grabbed from a random display counter at a department store. It was a profound insult, wrapped in a pretty little box. I smiled brightly, forcing my eyes to light up with fake, overwhelming delight. I told him it was absolutely stunning and perfect. I turned around and pulled my hair sweepingly over my shoulder, asking him to put it on my neck. I felt his cold, deceitful fingers brush against my skin as he clasped the cheap metal chain. I turned back, kissed his cheek, and thanked him for being such a wonderful, thoughtful provider. Julian beamed with sheer, unadulterated arrogance. Julian told me he was going to take a quick hot shower and head straight to bed because he was exhausted. I watched him walk up the grand staircase, my fake smile dropping instantly the exact second his back was turned. I touched the cheap pendant resting against my collarbone, silently vowing that this would be the absolute last piece of garbage he would ever hand me. I waited in the dark living room for 45 agonizing minutes. I listened carefully to the sound of the shower running, the heavy thud of his footsteps moving across the hardwood floor of the master bedroom, and finally the deep, rhythmic sound of his snoring. Julian was a notoriously heavy sleeper, especially after consuming alcohol. Once I was absolutely certain he was unconscious, I quietly stood up and moved silently down the hallway toward his private home office. The room was his personal sanctuary, strictly off limits to everyone, including me. Julian always claimed it contained highly sensitive client financial information and that maintaining strict physical security was a binding legal requirement for his firm. He assumed that because I was a dutiful, rule-following wife, I would never cross that boundary. He foolishly forgot that boundary crossing was the exact definition of a forensic financial audit. I locked the heavy mahogany door securely behind me. I sat down at his massive glass desk. His sleek laptop sat in the center, locked securely behind biometric fingerprint scanners and complex encryption software. Julian considered himself a brilliant technological genius. He genuinely believed his security measures were completely impenetrable. But I tracked elite corporate embezzlers for a living. I dealt with financial criminals who hid billions of dollars across international borders. Julian's off-the-shelf encryption software was absolute amateur hour compared to the complex systems I dismantled every single week. I plugged a small encrypted flash drive into the side port of his machine and ran a customized bypass script. It took exactly 4 minutes and 20 seconds for the screen to flash green. I was completely in. I began rapidly scanning his directories, specifically looking for the offshore limited liability company documents Desmond had explicitly mentioned. I quickly found the hidden partition drive, labeled under a fake obscure client portfolio name. I opened the digital files, and the sheer volume of his bold criminality was staggering. There were hundreds of pages of illegal wire transfers, forged notary stamps officially signed by Chloe, and digital signatures perfectly mimicking my own handwriting. But as I scrolled deeper into the hidden directory, I found something infinitely worse. I found a highly classified folder that made the blood freeze entirely in my veins. The folder was explicitly labeled with the street address of my late grandmother's house in Baldwin Hills. This was not just a piece of standard real estate. This was an ancestral home, a critical cornerstone of our family history. My grandmother had worked her fingers to the bone cleaning houses for wealthy families just to buy that property in cash. It represented decades of Black generational wealth, profound pride, and immense survival. She had left it to me in her will, making me promise to keep it safely within our family forever. I opened the portable document format files inside the folder, my breath catching painfully in my throat. Staring back at me was a fraudulent power of attorney document, granting Julian full unchecked legal control over the Baldwin Hills property. The document bore my forged signature perfectly replicated and was officially notarized by Chloe Sterling. Beneath the fake power of attorney was a massive, terrifying lending agreement. Julian had quietly taken out a $600,000 home equity line of credit against my grandmother's fully paid-off house. He had ruthlessly stripped all the equity from my most sacred family inheritance. He transferred that stolen cash directly into the offshore account they had opened, using my stolen identity. The sheer audacity of the violation made my chest tight with a blinding, suffocating rage. He had not just stolen my identity to launder his client's money. He had stolen my family legacy. He had violated my grandmother's memory to fund his glamorous lifestyle and his illicit affair. My hands shook violently as I downloaded every single file onto my encrypted flash drive. I gathered the undeniable proof of his federal crimes. I safely ejected the drive, erased all traces of my bypass script, and returned the laptop exactly as I found it. I walked out of the office into the dark hallway. Julian thought he was playing a brilliant game against a blind opponent, but he had no idea I was about to burn his entire kingdom to the ground. The next afternoon brought the dreaded Sunday dinner at my mother-in-law Beatrice's sprawling estate. Beatrice lived in a gated community in Buckhead surrounded by affluent African-American socialites who spent their weekends discussing country club politics and charity galas. Today was no exception. I wore a tailored emerald green dress, my natural hair styled in an elegant updo. I looked immaculate, but in Beatrice's eyes I would always be the girl from the wrong side of the tracks who did not pledge the right sorority or attend the right exclusive events. Julian held my hand as we walked into the grand foyer, playing the role of the devoted husband flawlessly. The sound of clinking crystal and boastful laughter echoed from the formal dining room. When we turned the corner, my blood instantly ran cold, though I kept my facial expression perfectly neutral. Sitting next to Beatrice was Chloe. She wore a pristine white dress, sipping a mimosa and laughing at my mother-in-law. The sheer disrespect of inviting my husband's mistress to a private family dinner was staggering. Beatrice had clearly orchestrated this entire scenario just to remind me of my subordinate place in her grand social hierarchy. Julian froze for a fraction of a second. I felt his grip on my hand tighten in panic. He quickly masked it with a boisterous greeting announcing our arrival. Beatrice stood up, adjusting her diamond bracelet, and kissed her son on both cheeks. She offered me a stiff nod before gesturing toward Chloe. Beatrice announced to the room that Chloe had graciously decided to drop by to discuss some highly exclusive luxury real estate opportunities for her friends in the Jack and Jill Social Club. She loudly praised Chloe for always maintaining such impeccable elegance, noting how perfectly pressed her hair was. Beatrice then turned her sharp, judgmental gaze directly toward me. Beatrice sighed loudly, stating that it was a shame my demanding career as a forensic accountant left me with so little time for personal grooming. She gestured vaguely at my natural hair, suggesting that perhaps if I softened my look and stopped being so aggressively masculine and focused on numbers, Julian would not look so exhausted all the time. She boldly told the table that a successful husband needed a soft traditional wife, not a stressed-out second breadwinner who smelled like cheap office coffee and financial reports. A few friends chuckled into their champagne flutes. Julian offered a weak laugh, refusing to defend me. Chloe sat there with a smug, victorious smirk playing on her glossy lips, drinking in my public humiliation. The old Maya would have shrunk into her chair, deeply wounded by the coordinated attack. The new Maya simply took a slow sip of her sparkling water. I smiled brightly, thanking Beatrice for her invaluable advice. I told her that working hard was a habit I picked up from people who actually had to earn their wealth, instead of conveniently marrying into it. The dining room went dead silent before someone nervously changed the subject. I took my seat next to Julian, maintaining perfect posture. Across the table, Julian's sister Tasha and her unemployed husband Darnell were holding court. Tasha waved her manicured hands to ensure everyone noticed her new jewelry. She demanded a toast, raising her glass to Julian. She announced that she and Darnell had just closed on a breathtaking multi-million-dollar mansion in an exclusive, heavily gated neighborhood. She dramatically thanked Julian for taking care of his blood, praising him as the ultimate provider and the greatest brother in the world. Darnell chimed in, bragging about how the new house featured a massive home theater and a 6-car garage. Tasha looked directly at me with a condescending sneer. She told me I should be incredibly grateful to have a husband who generated enough wealth to take care of his extended family without ever needing to dip into our shared marital accounts. She bragged that Julian had handled all the complicated financing through his elite wealth management firm, completely shielding them from the messy paperwork. Beatrice beamed with absolute pride, theatrically wiping away a tear as she praised her son for being a true patriarch. Chloe clapped her hands together, staring at Julian with undisguised adoration, telling him how exceptionally generous and brilliant he was for looking out for his lovely sister. I smiled warmly at Tasha, offering my most sincere congratulations on her beautiful new home. Beneath the heavy linen tablecloth, I quietly slipped my phone out of my clutch. My face remained an absolute mask of pleasant engagement, but my fingers were flying rapidly across the illuminated screen. Using the secure access portal on my phone, I logged directly into the hidden digital files I had meticulously extracted from Julian's encrypted laptop the previous night. I desperately needed to verify exactly how Julian had managed to purchase a multi-million-dollar property for his useless sister without alerting me or triggering any banking red flags on our joint financial accounts. I pulled up the current property tax records for the affluent neighborhood Tasha had just loudly named, dropped. I systematically cross-referenced the county registry database with the specific offshore limited liability company documents Julian and Chloe had fraudulently created using my stolen identity. The digital paper trail unfolded before my eyes with terrifying clarity, confirming my absolute worst suspicions. The newly purchased luxury mansion was not registered in Tasha's name. It was not registered in Darnell's name. It was certainly not registered in Julian's name. The legal deed for the sprawling property was formally registered to a shadowy holding company. I tracked the internet protocol addresses and corporate registration numbers, linking that holding company back to the parent corporation. The parent corporation was the exact offshore entity Julian had funded using the stolen $600,000 home equity line of credit he took out against my late grandmother's house. He had ruthlessly drained my sacred family legacy, funneled the stolen cash through the fake company registered in my name, and used those illicit funds to purchase a luxury mansion for his entitled sister. The sheer audacity of the financial crime nearly made me laugh out loud right there at the dinner table. Tasha and Darnell were sitting directly across from me, arrogantly bragging about their lavish new lifestyle and insulting my professional work ethic. They were loudly thanking Julian for a massive house that was entirely funded by my grandmother's literal blood, sweat, and tears. They had absolutely no idea that legally on every single federal and state housing document, Maya Caldwell was the sole registered owner of their shiny new mansion. They were living in my house purchased exclusively with my stolen money, while sitting at a table actively mocking my existence. I locked my phone screen and slipped the device back into my clutch, my heart beating with a steady rhythm. I looked across the table at Chloe, who was leaning toward Julian, whispering in his ear, while Beatrice proudly watched them with a sickening smile. I looked at Tasha, happily shoving prime rib into her mouth while showing off photos of her new custom kitchen. I looked at Julian, my treacherous husband, basking in the unearned praise of his sycophantic family. They were participating in a coordinated feast, feeding directly off my exhaustive labor, my flawless credit, and my cherished family history. Julian leaned over and placed his heavy hand affectionately on my thigh under the table. He whispered softly into my ear, asking if I was okay, because I was being unusually quiet this evening. He asked if his mother's insensitive comments had upset me again, offering a fake, deeply patronizing tone of marital concern. He promised we would leave the dinner party soon so I could go home and rest my busy, heavily stressed out mind. I turned my head and looked him directly in the eyes. I gave him a flawless smile, ensuring the warm expression reached my eyes perfectly. I told him I was completely and utterly fine. I told him I was just sitting here feeling incredibly grateful for everything he had done for his family. I said it was truly inspiring to see exactly how all the pieces of his hard work fit together to provide such a comfortable, secure life for Tasha and Darnell. I affectionately patted his hand, my voice dripping with sweet honey, and told him he was going to get exactly what he deserved. Julian beamed happily, oblivious to the lethal double meaning behind my words. He puffed out his chest, kissed my cheek, and turned back to accept more praise from his adoring mother and scheming mistress. I picked up my glass, taking a slow sip of iced water to wash down the bitter taste of their collective betrayal. They thought they had successfully drained my vital resources. They genuinely believed I was a blind, obedient workhorse, pulling the cart of their luxury lifestyle. They had absolutely no idea I held the power to legally evict Tasha, financially bankrupt Julian, and send Chloe directly to federal prison. The Sunday dinner carried on loudly around me, with loud, obnoxious laughter and endless boasts of unearned wealth. I sat perfectly still in the very center of the chaotic dining room, perfectly composed, quietly calculating the precise, devastating velocity with which I was going to drop the heavy hammer of justice on their truly miserable, thieving lives. The dinner plates were finally cleared from the long mahogany table, signaling the end of the heavy main course. Beatrice loudly demanded that someone brew a fresh pot of espresso to serve with her imported French macarons. I immediately volunteered for the task, eager for a momentary reprieve from the suffocating, pretentious air of the formal dining room. I gathered a tall stack of fine china plates and walked into the massive, pristine kitchen. I set the heavy plates near the marble sink. Before I could even turn on the brass faucet, the heavy swinging door pushed open behind me. The sharp, aggressive clicking of expensive stiletto heels announced her arrival before she even spoke a single word. Chloe walked in carrying absolutely nothing, her pristine white dress immaculate. She leaned casually against the kitchen island, crossing her arms and watching me with the predatory gaze of a woman who genuinely believed she had already won the war. I ignored her completely, methodically scraping the remnants of food into the garbage disposal. Chloe stepped closer, invading my personal space, her cloying floral perfume clashing violently with the rich smell of the coffee beans I was grinding. She picked up a delicate cloth dish towel, pretending she had come into the kitchen to help me dry the dishes. She leaned in dangerously close, her glossy lips hovering just inches from my ear. She maliciously whispered that she wanted to thank me for always working so incredibly hard at my job. She said it was truly inspiring how I handled all the boring, tedious financial burdens of my household without ever complaining. Her voice dropped to a sickeningly sweet purr as she told me that my exhausting work schedule gave Julian the freedom to focus his energy on women who actually knew how to treat a real man properly. She patted my shoulder with feigned sympathy, digging her acrylic nails slightly into my skin. The sheer audacity of her statement hung heavy in the warm kitchen air. A younger, more fragile version of myself might have broken down right there, shedding hot tears of humiliated defeat over the marble sink. I might have slapped her smug face or thrown the scalding hot coffee directly onto her pristine white designer dress. But tears and temper tantrums were weapons reserved for the weak and powerless. I was a highly trained forensic accountant, currently holding the digital keys to her future federal prison cell. I slowly turned off the running water, dried my hands meticulously on a fresh towel, and turned around to face her directly. I did not flinch, and I certainly did not cry. I looked her up and down, taking in the expensive diamond jewelry she undoubtedly bought with my stolen equity. I simply smiled, displaying a razor-sharp expression. I told her she was very welcome. I locked eyes with her, letting the absolute certainty of my impending victory radiate through my steady gaze. I gently reached out and adjusted the collar of her white dress, my voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper. I told her to make sure she was saving up her money because reality was about to become incredibly expensive for her. Chloe stepped back quickly, visibly unnerved by my complete lack of emotional distress. Her smug smirk faltered, replaced by a fleeting shadow of deep confusion. She opened her mouth to shoot back a defensive insult, but the heavy kitchen door swung open again. Julian walked in, rubbing his stomach and asking if the espresso was ready yet. Chloe instantly transformed back into the charming, innocent sorority sister, laughing brightly and claiming she was just helping me wash up the dishes. Julian praised her for being so helpful and kissed my cheek, completely oblivious to the lethal tension vibrating throughout the room. I handed him the heavy silver tray of espresso cups, telling him I would be out in just a moment. I watched them walk back to the dining room together, fully aware that they were walking straight toward their own spectacular destruction. The very next morning, the heavy rain from the weekend had cleared, leaving the city skyline sharp and bright against the cold blue sky. Julian left for his wealth management firm at 7 o'clock sharp, kissing my forehead and telling me he had another brutally long day of stressful client meetings ahead of him. I waited exactly 30 minutes after his luxury car pulled out of our long driveway. I dressed quickly in inconspicuous dark clothing, left my primary cell phone sitting on the kitchen counter to prevent any digital location tracking, and took a prepaid burner phone I had purchased with cash months ago for strict emergencies. I drove to a secure location Desmond Pierce had designated when I called the restricted number on his plain white business card earlier that morning. The small brass bell above the door chimed softly as I walked inside the establishment. The shop was nearly empty, smelling strongly of roasted beans and old paper. I spotted Desmond immediately. He was sitting in a dark corner booth facing the front entrance, dressed down in a simple dark sweater and jeans, blending perfectly into the mundane background. He slid a coffee across the table as I sat down. His sharp eyes scanned the street outside the window before focusing entirely on me. He did not waste time with pleasantries or basic small talk. He stated clearly that the digital files I had bypassed and extracted from Julian's laptop were the exact missing link the federal government had been desperately searching for over the past year. He confirmed that the offshore limited liability company registered fraudulently in my name was the primary vehicle Julian was actively using to siphon millions of dollars from high-net-worth clients. Desmond leaned forward, resting his muscular forearms on the wooden table, his voice low and intensely serious. He explained the harsh, unforgiving reality of federal financial crime investigations. While the digital evidence I discovered was incredibly damning, Julian was a seasoned wealth manager who knew exactly how to manipulate the complicated legal system. Julian could easily claim in federal court that his personal laptop had been maliciously hacked or that a rogue employee had set up the offshore accounts without his direct, explicit knowledge. He could argue that since my specific name was on the corporate registry, I was the one secretly orchestrating the massive embezzlement scheme entirely behind his back. The federal prosecutors needed something completely undeniable to secure a solid conviction. Desmond looked me directly in the eyes and explained that they needed Julian's actual, physical signatures on a highly specific set of legal documents. They needed a legally binding paper trail that tied Julian directly and irrefutably to the fraudulent transfers without implicating me in the dangerous process. Desmond pulled a thick manila folder from his worn leather satchel and slid it smoothly across the table toward me. Inside were drafted documents that looked exactly like standard spousal consent forms and routine annual tax adjustments. Desmond explained that these specific documents contained hidden legal clauses that would force Julian to claim sole fiduciary responsibility for the offshore entity and all its associated illicit assets. If I could get Julian to sign these exact papers in dark ink, the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service would have everything they needed to arrest him, freeze his stolen assets, and grant me full federal immunity from prosecution. Julian was a narcissistic sociopath who would not hesitate to destroy me completely if he suspected even for a moment that I was working directly with federal authorities. I would have to lie convincingly to my husband's face sleep in the exact same bed, with a man actively trying to ruin my life and manipulate him into signing his own federal death warrant. Desmond asked me if I was absolutely certain I wanted to take on this terrifying role. He offered me the safe option to simply walk away, to let the federal agents raid the house today, and take my chances in court with a good defense attorney. I looked down at the thick manila folder resting on the table. I thought about the $600,000 fraudulent loan he took out against my late grandmother's beloved house. I thought about Tasha and Darnell bragging obnoxiously at the dinner table about a mansion bought with my stolen legacy. I thought about Chloe's malicious whisper in my kitchen mocking my hard work and dedication. I placed my hand firmly flat on top of the manila folder and pulled it slowly across the table toward me. I looked Desmond in the eye and officially agreed to be his federal informant. I told him I was absolutely not going to let Julian Caldwell steal my family legacy and walk away unpunished. I was officially entering a deadly high-stakes game of financial chess against my husband, and I intended to checkmate him. 2 days after my clandestine meeting with Desmond, the inevitable move I had been waiting for finally occurred. I was sitting at the kitchen island nursing a cup of green tea and reviewing a dummy spreadsheet for work, maintaining my carefully crafted illusion of absolute normalcy. Julian strolled into the kitchen, his posture projecting the weary confidence of a highly successful provider returning from a brutal battlefield of high finance. In his left hand, he casually carried a thick stack of documents bound together by a heavy black binder clip. He dropped his expensive leather briefcase by the door, loosened his custom silk tie, and let out a dramatic, performative sigh designed entirely to elicit my immediate sympathy. I played my role flawlessly, asking him if the market had been particularly unforgiving today. He leaned over the kitchen island, kissed the top of my head, and launched into a highly rehearsed monologue about crushing corporate regulations, impossible client demands, and the endless bureaucratic red tape he was forced to navigate just to keep our affluent lifestyle afloat. He slid the thick stack of papers across the cool marble countertop until it rested directly in front of my teacup. He tapped the top page with his index finger, offering me a tight, artificially exhausted smile. He told me these were just some routine tax adjustments and standard spousal consent forms his wealth management firm required for the upcoming fiscal quarter. He claimed the firm was updating their internal compliance protocols and needed my signature on a few mundane declarations regarding our joint financial accounts. His voice was smooth, dripping with the practiced manipulative charm he used to close multi-million-dollar deals with his wealthy, unsuspecting clients. He handed me a sleek, gold-plated pen, casually instructing me to just sign on the highlighted yellow tabs so he could drop the paperwork back off with his legal compliance team first thing the next morning. I stared down at the dense, legally complex pages, feeling the familiar, suffocating weight of his condescension wash over me. This specific tactic was a deeply ingrained pattern in our marriage. For 5 years, Julian had relentlessly leveraged his prestigious title as a senior wealth manager to systematically belittle my own professional financial literacy. Whenever money investments or long-term fiscal planning came up in conversation, he would deliberately use convoluted Wall Street jargon to aggressively talk over me. He would smile that patronizing, arrogant smile and tell me not to worry my pretty head about the complicated mechanics of compound interest or offshore tax shelters. He consistently treated me as if my rigorous career as a forensic accountant was nothing more than a cute, glorified bookkeeping hobby. He genuinely believed that because I tracked corporate fraud for mid-level companies, I lacked the sophisticated, elite intellect required to understand his high-level wealth management strategies. He assumed I would look at a towering stack of dense legal paperwork, feel immediately overwhelmed by the complex terminology, and simply sign my name wherever he pointed, just to avoid a condescending lecture. In the early years of our marriage, I had foolishly allowed him to take the lead, blinding myself to his financial dominance because I trusted him implicitly. I had signed tax returns and investment disclosures without a second thought, completely trusting the man who slept beside me every single night. He was counting on that deeply established pattern of blind obedient trust right now. I looked up at Julian, keeping my eyes wide and entirely innocent. I picked up the gold pen, twirling it slowly between my fingers. I told him that I was absolutely exhausted from staring at numbers all day and asked if I could just review and sign them tomorrow morning at my office. I promised I would have a courier deliver the signed package directly to his receptionist before his first client meeting. Julian frowned, a tiny, almost imperceptible flash of genuine irritation crossing his polished features. He hated it when his perfectly orchestrated plans faced even the slightest, most mundane delay. He opened his mouth to argue, likely prepared to pressure me into signing immediately, but I quickly stifled a fake yawn and rubbed my eyes. I told him I just wanted to go upstairs, run a hot bath, and relax with my amazing hardworking husband. The appeal to his massive, fragile ego worked instantly. His frown smoothed out into a smug, victorious grin. He kissed my cheek, told me to take my time, and agreed that having the courier drop it off would be perfectly fine. He walked away toward the master bedroom, completely unaware that he had just handed me the very weapon he intended to use for my execution. He walked away with the swagger of a man who believed he had successfully outsmarted the entire world, utterly blind to the reality that his overconfidence was actively sealing his ultimate doom. The following morning, I arrived at my secure downtown office an hour earlier than usual. I locked my heavy office door, lowered the window blinds, and spread Julian's thick stack of documents across my wide oak desk. I brewed a strong cup of black coffee, tied my natural hair back, and shifted completely into my forensic investigator persona. I did not look at the papers as a loving wife. I examined them as a ruthless, highly trained auditor searching for the fatal flaw in a complex corporate crime. I skipped past the intentionally boring, aggressively verbose cover letters designed to put the reader to sleep. I ignored the standard disclosure statements and the fake tax adjustment summaries. I dug straight into the heavy, substantive core of the legal packet. Using a yellow highlighter and a red pen, I began dissecting the dense legal jargon, stripping away the complex terminology to reveal the true malicious intent hidden beneath the surface. It took me exactly 45 minutes of intense, focused reading to uncover the absolute depths of my husband's unparalleled treachery. The documents were absolutely not routine tax adjustments. They were not standard spousal consent forms required by his wealth management firm. The paperwork was a highly sophisticated, legally binding transfer of assets. Julian had drafted an elaborate contract designed to systematically drain every single remaining ounce of my personal financial security. The clauses were buried deep within page after page of confusing legalese, completely masking the catastrophic financial ruin they represented. He had clearly paid a ruthless, highly unethical lawyer a small fortune to construct this deceptive labyrinth of contractual obligations, ensuring that any average person would immediately surrender out of sheer intellectual fatigue. I read the third section, my blood running as cold as liquid nitrogen. The document explicitly authorized the total liquidation and immediate transfer of my entire personal retirement portfolio. My 401k, the account I had diligently funded with every spare dollar I earned since I entered the workforce, was slated to be entirely emptied. The contract also targeted my personal high-yield savings accounts, my private stock portfolios, and the small emergency cash reserves I kept entirely separate from our joint marital accounts. Julian had somehow tracked down every single financial safety net I had meticulously built for myself over the past decade. He was attempting to legally bind me into willingly surrendering everything I owned. But the horror did not stop at the liquidation of my personal assets. I followed the financial routing instructions detailed in the back of the legal packet, tracing exactly where my money was supposed to go once it was drained from my accounts. The funds were not being moved into our joint marital investments. They were not being funneled into a shared retirement trust. The documents explicitly authorized the irrevocable transfer of all my liquidated assets directly into a newly formed, highly shielded private trust located in a foreign banking jurisdiction known for its absolute financial secrecy. I pulled the corporate registry details for this new offshore trust, my eyes scanning the fine print listing the designated trustees and primary beneficiaries. I felt a wave of absolute sickening disgust wash over my entire body. The private trust was completely controlled by exactly two individuals. The first authorized trustee was Julian Caldwell. The second authorized trustee, holding full legal power to withdraw transfer and spend the assets without any secondary approval, was Chloe Sterling. My husband and my former sorority sister had not just stolen my identity to launder money for their fraudulent schemes. They were not just stealing the massive equity from my late grandmother's sacred ancestral home to buy a luxury mansion for Julian's entitled sister. They were actively, methodically preparing to drain my entire life savings directly into their own pockets. They were stealing my retirement, my emergency funds, and my hard-earned investments to fully fund their illicit new life together. The sheer terrifying scope of their malicious plan finally clicked into perfect, horrifying focus. Julian was never planning to stay and face the inevitable federal fallout when his massive wire fraud scheme eventually collapsed. He knew the federal authorities were closing in. He knew the stolen client funds would eventually be noticed by the Internal Revenue Service. This irrevocable trust was his ultimate escape hatch. He and Chloe were systematically liquidating every single asset attached to my name, planning to drain me completely dry and then flee the country with their stolen millions. They were going to leave me completely bankrupt, entirely penniless, and holding the bag for multiple federal felonies while they lived in absolute luxury on a tropical island. I sat back in my leather office chair, the sheer magnitude of their profound cruelty settling heavily over my shoulders. Julian had smiled in my face, kissed my forehead, and handed me the literal instrument of my total destruction, expecting me to blindly sign away my entire existence just because he used a polite tone of voice. He viewed me as nothing more than a convenient disposable resource. A temporary financial host he could comfortably bleed dry before moving on to his next glamorous destination with his cunning mistress. I looked down at Julian's fraudulent documents, and then I reached into my locked desk drawer. I pulled out the manila envelope Desmond Pierce had given me at the coffee shop. I laid the federal trap documents directly next to Julian's malicious paperwork. Julian wanted to play a ruthless game of deceptive legal manipulation. He wanted to use my assumed ignorance to secure his glorious escape. I picked up my red pen, a cold, predatory smile slowly spreading across my face. I was going to use his blinding arrogance to ensure he never saw another day of freedom for the rest of his miserable life. I began my work with the precision of a surgeon. As a forensic accountant, my daily routine involved tearing apart deeply buried financial irregularities and deciphering complex contractual loopholes. Reconstructing a simple legal packet was practically basic elementary work. I took a deep breath and centered my thoughts completely before proceeding with the operation. I booted up my secure desktop terminal and laid his original documents flat on my desk. I scanned every single page into my system, creating high-resolution digital copies. I analyzed the exact typography his corrupt lawyer had utilized. It was a standard font size 11, with a highly specific line spacing ratio, designed to look aggressively dense. I noted the precise weight of the premium legal paper stock. My strategy was devastatingly straightforward. I would preserve the original cover pages completely intact. These introductory sheets contained the innocent-sounding titles, the firm logos, and the generic summary paragraphs Julian expected to see. They were the comforting illusion he relied upon. However, the subsequent pages, the heavy substantive core containing his malicious traps, were about to be entirely eradicated and replaced. I recreated the intricate headers and footers, mimicking the professional aesthetic of his wealth management firm down to the microscopic pixels. I was actively ripping the iron teeth out of his trap and burying them directly in the path of his own arrogant footsteps. This was the absolute pinnacle of forensic retaliation against a deeply flawed, narcissistic man. With the formatting perfectly aligned, I began drafting the new legal clauses. My first target was the multi-million-dollar mansion currently occupied by his entitled sister, Tasha, and her lazy husband, Darnell. Julian had purchased that luxury property, using the stolen equity from my late grandmother and her ancestral home. He had been funneling the illicit cash through the offshore limited liability company, registered fraudulently in my name. I drafted a highly specific, irrevocable transfer of deed. I legally stripped the ownership of her beloved mansion away from the shadowy holding company and reassigned it entirely permanently and exclusively to Maya Caldwell. I buried this catastrophic transfer deep within a section deceptively titled Routine Real Estate Asset Reallocation. I wrapped the devastating loss of his sister and her home in thick, mind-numbing bureaucratic jargon, ensuring that anyone would naturally want to skim past the exhausting paragraphs. My second objective was far more dangerous, requiring the precise federal language provided directly by Special Agent Desmond Pierce. I pulled the manila envelope Desmond had given me and carefully transcribed the exact legal stipulations the Federal Bureau of Investigation required. I integrated a dense, highly obscure fiduciary liability clause into a section supposedly detailing routine international tax compliance. By signing this specific page, Julian would formally acknowledge that he was the sole exclusive operator and primary beneficiary of the offshore shell company. He would legally admit that the corporate structure utilizing my identity was established entirely under his direct executive control and that he retained absolute authorization over all associated wire transfers. The clause effectively absolved me of any financial or criminal liability, placing the entire crushing weight of the federal embezzlement operation squarely onto his broad, custom-tailored shoulders. I printed the newly fabricated pages using the matching premium paper stock. I laid them out on my desk, alongside the original cover letters. The physical resemblance was utterly flawless. I carefully arranged the pages in the exact same sequence, aligning the edges perfectly. I secured the thick stack with the original heavy black binder clip. I picked up my favorite blue ink pen and confidently signed my name on the designated lines. I left the necessary counter-signature spaces conspicuously blank for my husband. I packed the explosive documents into my leather tote bag, locked my office, and walked out into the afternoon sunlight. The pieces were perfectly positioned on the board. It was time to execute the final devastating move. I drove back to our quiet suburban estate, my mind remarkably calm and intensely focused. I was preparing to deliver the performance of an absolute lifetime. I knew his psychology intimately. His towering arrogance was his greatest vulnerability. He genuinely believed he was the smartest person in any room, especially when that room only contained his seemingly compliant wife. To ensure he signed the documents without a shred of hesitation or scrutiny, I needed to construct an environment that thoroughly validated his inflated ego. I needed to make him feel completely relaxed, deeply appreciated, and entirely in control. I went straight to the kitchen and began preparing his absolute favorite meal. I spent 2 hours meticulously crafting red wine braised short ribs, creamy garlic mashed potatoes, and roasted asparagus. The rich, savory aroma filled the entire house, creating an atmosphere of cozy domestic bliss. I set the formal dining table with our fine china, lit a pair of tall, taper candles, and opened an expensive bottle of bold red wine he had been saving for a special occasion. I changed into a soft, flattering cashmere sweater and applied a light touch of makeup, ensuring I looked beautiful, attentive, and deeply devoted. Julian arrived home at exactly 7 in the evening. The moment he walked through the front door and smelled the braised beef, a look of immense satisfaction washed over his face. He kissed my cheek, praising me for being such an incredible, thoughtful wife. I poured him a large glass of the expensive red wine, offering him a warm, adoring smile. We sat down at the candlelit table, and I listened with rapt attention as he spent the next 45 minutes boasting about his brilliant financial strategies and the massive profits he generated for his firm today. I nodded enthusiastically, asking him gentle, prompting questions that allowed him to brag even further. I stroked his ego with surgical precision, inflating his sense of superiority until he was practically glowing with self-importance. As we finished the decadent meal, I stood up and walked over to the kitchen island. I retrieved the thick stack of documents and carried them back to the dining table. I placed the heavy packet gently next to his empty dinner plate, setting a sleek black ink pen right beside it. I kept my voice soft, sweet, and entirely casual. I told him I had thoroughly reviewed the routine tax adjustments and spousal consent forms during my lunch break just as he requested. I said I had signed exactly where he indicated and mentioned that he just needed to add his official countersignatures on the back pages so the compliance department could finalize the quarterly updates tomorrow morning. Julian picked up his wine glass, taking a slow, deeply relaxed sip of the rich red wine. He glanced down at the documents, his eyes barely registering the pristine cover pages. His mind was entirely clouded by the delicious food, the expensive alcohol, and the intoxicating high of his own perceived brilliance. He assumed he had successfully manipulated his foolish, trusting wife into surrendering her entire life savings. He believed his grand escape plan with Chloe was now completely secured. He did not suspect for a single fleeting second that the quiet woman sitting across from him had entirely rewritten his destiny. Julian picked up the black ink pen with a casual, dismissive flick of his wrist. He did not turn back the cover pages to read the dense, bureaucratic paragraphs hidden within. He did not verify the legal clauses or check the specific asset transfer details. Blinded by his own monumental arrogance, he simply flipped directly to the final signature pages. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting quietly in my lap, watching him intently. My heart beat with a steady rhythmic thrum as the tip of his pen touched the premium paper. He signed his name on the first line, legally transferring the multi-million-dollar mansion away from his sister Tasha and placing it exclusively into my permanent ownership. He flipped to the next page and signed his name again, formally accepting sole fiduciary responsibility for the offshore shell company and officially admitting to orchestrating the massive federal wire fraud scheme. He added his final signature on the last page, completely absolving me of any financial or criminal liability. He closed the thick packet, secured the heavy black binder clip, and slid the documents back across the table toward me. He smiled his signature arrogant smile, thanking me for taking care of the boring paperwork so efficiently. He told me I was the best wife a man could ever ask for. I reached out and pulled the signed documents toward my chest, feeling the immense, undeniable weight of my absolute victory. I returned his smile, radiating a cold, lethal triumph that he was entirely too blind to recognize. I said it was my absolute pleasure. I promised he had no idea how true those words rang. The trap snapped shut. He was completely doomed. The very next morning, the grand illusion of our perfect marriage continued seamlessly. Julian left for his office with a spring in his step, leaving the signed documents tucked safely in my briefcase. I secured the explosive federal paperwork in a hidden safe deposit box during my lunch break, ensuring Julian could never access or destroy the evidence of his own confession. With the legal trap officially set, I expected the weekend to bring a moment of quiet anticipation. Instead, it brought a level of sheer, unadulterated disrespect that surpassed even my most cynical and heavily guarded expectations entirely today. Beatrice summoned us to her sprawling Buckhead estate on Saturday afternoon for what she claimed was an urgent family announcement. When Julian and I arrived, we found her sitting on her velvet chaise lounge in the sunroom sipping a mimosa and looking exceptionally pleased with herself. She clapped her manicured hands together and announced that she and Julian had been secretly planning a massive surprise for me. They had decided to throw an extravagant 5th anniversary vow renewal. Beatrice proudly declared that she had already secured the grand ballroom at the extremely exclusive Oakwood Heritage Country Club for us completely. This was the most elite, strictly invite-only establishment in the entire city. It was a bastion of old money, a place where the wealthiest African-American socialites gathered to flaunt their generational status and secure high-level corporate connections. A membership at Oakwood Heritage required a rigorous screening process and a staggering initiation fee. Beatrice had leveraged every single social connection she possessed just to secure a weekend reservation for the ballroom. Julian wrapped his arm around my waist and kissed my cheek, acting like the most romantic, highly devoted, and intensely dedicated husband in the world right now. He told me that our 5-year milestone deserved to be celebrated in front of everyone we loved and respected. He claimed he wanted the entire city to witness his profound dedication to our marriage. I saw right through his charming, polished facade. This lavish vow renewal was absolutely not a celebration of our love. It was a calculated, high-stakes public relations stunt. Julian needed to maintain his flawless image as a trustworthy, successful family man to keep his wealthy clients comfortable and completely unaware of his massive financial crimes and deeply hidden corporate embezzlement strategies moving forward today. Beatrice needed the event to elevate her precarious social standing among the elite, proving to her judgmental peers that her son was wildly prosperous. They were using our wedding anniversary as a glamorous theatrical production to blind their wealthy associates, creating a perfect smokescreen while Julian actively laundered their investments through his offshore shell company. If the grand announcement of the vow renewal was an insult, Beatrice's next revelation was a profound, suffocating slap in the face. She took a delicate sip of her mimosa and stated that an event of this massive scale required a highly professional touch indeed. She casually mentioned that she had hired a luxury events and real estate concierge to handle every single detail of the upcoming celebration. The heavy mahogany doors of the sunroom swung open, and Chloe Sterling strutted into the room carrying a sleek silver tablet and a thick binder of fabric swatches. She wore a bright, predatory smile, her eyes locking directly onto mine with a sickening mix of triumph and malice. Beatrice cheerfully explained that Chloe had graciously agreed to step in as our primary event planner. She praised Chloe for having the absolute best high-end floral connections locally. The sheer unfathomable audacity of the situation hung heavily in the sunlit room. My mother-in-law had explicitly hired my husband's active mistress to plan our romantic vow renewal. Chloe was actively sleeping with the groom, actively participating in the federal wire fraud scheme designed to bankrupt the bride, and now she was getting paid to pick out the wedding cake and arrange the seating charts. It was a level of psychological warfare and blatant disrespect that defied all logical comprehension entirely. Julian squeezed my waist again, giving me a very bright and intensely expectant smile right here today. He told me that having Chloe handle the complicated logistics would take all the stressful planning off my busy shoulders. He said he wanted me to just relax and feel like an absolute queen on our special day. Chloe stepped forward, her expensive perfume filling the space between us. She looked me directly in the eyes and said she was incredibly honored to help us celebrate such a beautiful, strong marriage. She promised to make the vow renewal an unforgettable night that our entire family would talk about for the rest of their natural lives, without any single doubt, ever. She added a sickeningly sweet tone to her voice, claiming that Julian had spared absolutely no expense to ensure I felt deeply appreciated. The old Maya would have snapped. The old Maya would have screamed, thrown her crystal mimosa glass at the wall, and exposed their filthy affair right there in the sunroom. But I was operating on a completely different frequency now. I was a federal informant holding the signed confession of the man trying to destroy me. I looked at Chloe, taking in her smug expression and her absolute certainty that she was the smartest woman alive forever. I looked at Beatrice, who was eagerly watching my reaction, hoping I would show a lack of class and refuse the gesture so she could call me ungrateful. I looked at Julian, the treacherous architect of this entire miserable circus. I smiled. I did not just offer a polite, tight-lipped grin. I produced a radiant, overjoyed, completely genuine-looking smile. I stepped away from Julian and walked directly over to Chloe, reaching out to grasp both of her hands in mine. I told her I was absolutely thrilled and deeply moved by the incredibly thoughtful and beautiful gesture today. I said there was no one I trusted more than my old sorority sister to design the perfect celebration of my marriage. I told Beatrice that the Oakwood Heritage Country Club was a brilliant, stunning choice of venue. I turned back to Julian and told him he was the most incredible husband a woman could ever ask for. The sheer relief that washed over their faces was almost comical. Beatrice clapped her hands again, completely satisfied that she had successfully maneuvered her son's mistress into my personal space without me suspecting a single thing about their dirty hidden secret today. Julian exhaled, clearly thrilled that his flawless public relations stunt was moving forward without any difficult resistance from his usually practical wife. Chloe squeezed my hands back, her smile faltering just a tiny fraction, clearly unsettled by my enthusiastic acceptance, but quickly covering it up with fake professional excitement. She suggested we sit down immediately and start looking at the luxury floral arrangements and the premium catering menus. For the next 2 hours, I sat on the velvet chaise lounge next to Chloe, sipping champagne and planning the most extravagant party of the decade while maintaining my absolute composure inside. Chloe took every available opportunity to assert her dominance and flaunt her intimate knowledge of my husband's personal preferences. When we discussed the dinner menu, she quickly vetoed my suggestion of roasted salmon, confidently stating that Julian greatly preferred the dry, aged filet mignon. When we looked at the cake designs, she smoothly insisted on a dark chocolate ganache, noting with a sly smirk that Julian always craved rich chocolate late at night. She was constantly dropping these deliberate, subtle hints, marking her territorial claim over the man sitting across the room, while pretending to be exceptionally perfectly helpful continually. I agreed to every single one of her arrogant suggestions. I nodded enthusiastically when she pushed for the most expensive imported orchids. I smiled brightly when she selected a premium jazz band that charged an exorbitant hourly rate. I let her control the color palette, the lighting design, and the grand entrance choreography. I offered zero resistance, completely validating her inflated sense of superiority. Chloe genuinely believed she was expertly rubbing her victory right in my face, humiliating the oblivious wife while planning the ultimate celebration of her own illicit relationship, completely unaware of the looming federal criminal investigation today. She thought she was designing a lavish romantic tribute to her future life with Julian. She had absolutely no idea she was actually designing the glamorous, highly publicized stage for her own federal arrest. Every expensive detail Chloe eagerly added to the country club venue was just another brilliant spotlight, illuminating the impending disaster. The Oakwood Heritage Country Club was the perfect inescapable trap. It was a highly secure private venue with limited exits, absolutely packed with the wealthiest, most influential figures in the city. Julian's incredibly wealthy clients would be sitting right in the front row watching him closely. The following Tuesday afternoon brought the next phase of this miserable masquerade. Chloe insisted we visit an incredibly exclusive bridal boutique located in the most expensive shopping district in the city to select my gown for the grand vow renewal. The boutique was a sanctuary of blinding white marble plush velvet seating and aggressive elitism. We were ushered into a private suite by a team of fawning attendants who immediately poured us tall flutes of expensive vintage champagne. Chloe dropped her designer handbag onto a velvet sofa and began aggressively barking orders at the boutique staff. She acted as if she were the actual bride, directing the attendants to bring out highly specific styles she claimed would perfectly suit my unique figure. I sat quietly on the sofa sipping my champagne and watching her parade around the showroom with absolute manic energy. She genuinely believed she was directing my entire life. Within 10 minutes, the attendants returned carrying a heavy garment bag. Chloe unzipped it with a theatrical flourish, revealing the most hideously unflattering gown I had ever seen. It was a chaotic mess of excessive stiff tulle, heavily beaded long sleeves, and a high suffocating neckline that looked completely outdated. It was essentially a highly expensive, overly decorated potato sack designed to completely hide my natural curves and make me look incredibly matronly. Chloe held it up against my body, offering me a brilliantly fake smile. She loudly proclaimed that the dress was absolutely perfect for me. She said it was deeply elegant, modest, and perfectly suited for a busy professional woman who did not want to look too flashy or desperate for attention. She added a malicious little laugh, claiming the high neckline would hide the stress lines I had been developing from working so many exhausting hours at my accounting firm recently. She then expertly pivoted to a deeply patronizing trip down memory lane. She reminded me of our college days in the sorority, specifically mentioning the spring formal, where I had worn a simple budget-friendly dress because I was working 2 jobs to pay my tuition. Chloe recalled how she had lent me a pair of her designer shoes out of sheer pity. She sighed dramatically, stating it was such a beautiful full-circle moment, that she was still here styling me and helping me look presentable for high society events all these years later. The sheer arrogance radiating from her pores was genuinely staggering. She was actively trying to force the betrayed wife into a hideous costume to ensure that she, the stunning mistress, would completely outshine the bride at the vow renewal. She wanted Julian to look at me standing at the altar in this awful gown and feel nothing but sheer repulsion. I played my role with absolute flawless precision. I did not throw the champagne in her face. I did not rip the ugly dress out of her manicured hands. I gasped in fake delight, placing my hands over my heart. I told Chloe she had an absolutely incredible eye for high fashion. I gushed about how the heavy fabric would be so comfortable and how the high neckline was so incredibly classy and sophisticated. I thanked her profusely for always looking out for me, reminding her that I was just a boring numbers girl who desperately needed her glamorous aesthetic guidance. I practically begged the boutique attendants to prepare the fitting room so I could try on her brilliant selection. Chloe beamed with absolute malicious satisfaction, entirely convinced she had successfully dominated the pathetic, oblivious wife once again. Chloe handed the heavy gown to the eager boutique attendants and instructed them to prepare the bridal suite for my fitting. She announced she needed to step out onto the private balcony to take a highly urgent call from a luxury real estate client. I knew perfectly well the call was not from a client. The sharp buzz of my burner phone vibrating against my thigh confirmed my immediate suspicion. I watched Chloe strut out to the balcony, her hips swaying, locking the glass door behind her. The very second she was completely out of sight, my fake smile vanished entirely. I set my crystal champagne flute down on the marble table and pulled the encrypted burner phone from the hidden pocket of my tailored blazer. The message was from Special Agent Desmond Pierce. It was brief, highly clinical, and absolutely devastating. He confirmed that the federal judges had officially signed every single required warrant. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had successfully verified the forged signatures on the offshore limited liability company documents using the hidden digital files I had extracted from Julian's laptop. The Internal Revenue Service had completed a full trace of the stolen $600,000 home equity line of credit, linking it directly to the multi-million-dollar mansion Julian had purchased for his sister Tasha. More importantly, Desmond confirmed that the newly signed trap documents I had manipulated Julian into signing were fully legally binding. Julian had officially admitted sole fiduciary responsibility for the massive wire fraud scheme. I rapidly typed my response utilizing the secure encrypted messaging application. I asked Desmond for the exact status of the targeted asset freezes. Desmond replied instantly, confirming that the federal financial lockdown protocols were completely staged and ready for immediate execution. Every single bank account tied to Julian Caldwell was flagged. Every offshore trust, every joint marital account, every secret domestic stash he had hidden away was locked into the federal crosshairs. But Desmond did not stop there. The warrants extended completely to Chloe Sterling, due to her active participation as the fraudulent notary and co-conspirator. Her luxury real estate commission accounts, her personal checking accounts, and her secret Cayman Islands trust were equally targeted. Finally, the federal net also swept up Beatrice Caldwell, whose country club memberships and lavish lifestyle were heavily subsidized by her son's stolen client funds. Desmond asked me for the precise target time to execute the massive financial freeze. He needed the exact moment when Julian and Chloe would be completely distracted, entirely unable to access their banking applications or attempt a desperate last-minute wire transfer. I looked through the glass balcony door, watching Chloe twirl her hair and laugh breathlessly into her cell phone, clearly flirting with my treacherous husband. They were both so intoxicatingly confident, so entirely certain they had successfully orchestrated the perfect grand deception. They believed they were days away from draining my entire life savings and escaping to a tropical paradise, leaving me completely bankrupt and facing federal prison. I looked down at the encrypted burner phone, my thumbs flying across the digital keyboard with lethal precision. I sent Desmond the exact execution time, 8:30 in the evening. I specifically chose 8:30 because that was the exact moment Julian was scheduled to stand on the grand stage of the Oakwood Heritage Country Club ballroom and deliver his highly publicized vow renewal speech. That was the precise minute he would be holding a microphone, looking deeply into my eyes, and lying to a room packed full of the wealthiest, most influential African American socialites in the entire city. I wanted his absolute financial ruin to occur exactly when his monstrous ego was at its absolute highest peak. Desmond sent a simple thumbs up emoji confirming the lethal schedule. The federal trap was now entirely locked and armed. At exactly 8:30 on Saturday night, the Internal Revenue Service would drop a massive digital guillotine on their entire existence. Every credit card Julian possessed would instantly decline. Every bank account Chloe checked would display a zero balance. Every single cent Beatrice relied upon to maintain her arrogant bougie facade would simply evaporate into the federal ether. I erased the encrypted messages, completely cleared the digital cache, and slipped the burner phone safely back into my hidden blazer pocket. I took a deep, steadying breath, allowing the cold, calculating forensic accountant to recede into the shadows while the foolish, oblivious wife returned to the main stage. The glass balcony door slid open, and Chloe marched back into the VIP suite, looking incredibly smug and deeply satisfied after her illicit phone call with my husband. She clapped her hands together loudly, demanding the boutique attendants hurry up and get me into the fitting room. She loudly declared that we had a massive vow renewal to plan and absolutely no time to waste on delays. I stood up from the plush velvet sofa, smoothing down my tailored blazer. I gave Chloe the brightest, most genuinely thrilled smile I could possibly muster. I told her I was absolutely ready to try on the hideous, heavy tulle dress she had maliciously selected for me. I thanked her again for being such an incredibly devoted, loyal sorority sister, and for dedicating so much of her valuable time to ensuring my vow renewal was completely unforgettable. I promised her that the upcoming celebration at the country club was going to be a night that absolutely no one in our entire social circle would ever possibly forget. I walked into the fitting room fully prepared to wear her ugly potato sack, knowing it was simply my battle armor for the incoming federal slaughter. As the boutique attendants carefully laced me into the suffocating heavy fabric, I stared at my reflection in the massive gilded mirror. The dress was just as repulsive as Chloe had intended, entirely stripping away my natural shape and replacing it with a frumpy, outdated silhouette. But looking into my own dark eyes, I did not see a victim wearing a terrible gown. I saw an executioner preparing for the final majestic swing of the axe. Let Chloe have her petty, cruel little victory today. Let Julian bask in the arrogant belief that he had completely outsmarted his hard-working, devoted wife. Their combined stupidity was the very foundation of my impending absolute triumph. The federal warrants were signed, sealed, and meticulously scheduled. The financial traps were utterly inescapable. I smoothed down the stiff, scratchy tulle of the hideous wedding gown and let out a soft, chilling laugh that echoed quietly in the small dressing room, ensuring the real show was about to be absolutely spectacular. I walked out of that suffocating bridal suite feeling completely and utterly invincible. The hideous white tulle dress was packaged safely inside a heavy garment bag swinging from my arm, while Chloe strutted ahead of me toward the grand exit. She was practically vibrating with toxic triumph, absolutely convinced she had successfully forced the pathetic, oblivious wife into a humiliating costume for the grand social event. I thanked her profusely one last time before getting into my car, offering her a cheerful wave as I pulled out of the luxury shopping district. The precise moment her smug face disappeared from my rearview mirror, my cheerful facade vanished instantly. I had absolutely no time to waste on celebrating small psychological victories. I had a massive legal execution to finalize, and the clock was ticking relentlessly toward Saturday evening. I navigated through the dense downtown traffic, steering my vehicle right toward the county clerk's central office. The imposing granite building represented the absolute core of legal property ownership in the city. I parked in the adjacent structure, grabbed my heavy leather briefcase, and walked through the tall revolving doors with the focused predatory stride of a woman about to reclaim her entire family legacy. I took a numbered ticket from the automated kiosk and sat on a hard wooden bench waiting patiently for my turn at the public recording window. I opened my briefcase and pulled out the thick legal packet Julian had blindly signed the night before. I ran my fingers over his arrogant, cursive signature, resting perfectly at the bottom of the irrevocable transfer clause. He had legally surrendered the multi-million-dollar mansion without asking a single question. His monumental pride had completely blinded him to the lethal financial snare I had meticulously constructed right under his incredibly treacherous and deceitful nose. When my assigned number finally flashed on the glowing digital screen, I approached the thick bulletproof glass of the recording window. A stern-looking municipal clerk asked exactly how she could assist me today. I slid the pristine stack of signed documents through the narrow metal slot. I kept my voice strictly professional, explaining that I needed to urgently record a transfer of deed for a residential property located in the affluent Buckhead district. The clerk adjusted her glasses and began deeply scrutinizing the complex paperwork. I watched her eyes carefully scan the dense legal jargon I had expertly crafted. Julian had originally purchased that sprawling estate using the stolen $600,000 home equity line of credit he illegally extracted from my late grandmother and her ancestral home. He had hidden those stolen funds inside an offshore limited liability company, fraudulently registered entirely in my precise name. Because my name was legally attached to that shadowy holding company, I possessed the absolute executive authority to transfer any lucrative assets it held. The new clause Julian had carelessly signed explicitly authorized the immediate unencumbered transfer of the property deed away from the holding company and directly into the sole personal ownership of Maya Caldwell. The clerk stamped the first page, examining the required notary seals and the bold counter-signatures. She typed rapidly on her mechanical keyboard, updating the massive county property registry database in real time. The loud, satisfying thump of her official recording stamp echoed beautifully through the quiet municipal lobby. She handed me a freshly printed copy of the updated property deed bearing the raised county seal. I looked down at the crisp white paper, feeling an immense wave of vindication. I was now the sole undisputed legal owner of the sprawling Buckhead estate. Tasha and Darnell, the entitled sister, and the lazy brother-in-law, who had ruthlessly mocked my work ethic at Sunday dinner, were now legally living in a house owned exclusively by me. They had zero financial equity, zero tenant rights, and zero legal protection against my impending wrath. I thanked the diligent clerk, secured the official property deed safely back inside my briefcase, and walked briskly out of the government building. My critical mission was only half complete at this point. Reclaiming the stolen property was merely the solid foundation of my retaliation. Removing the ungrateful parasites currently occupying my home required a much more aggressive, immediate legal mechanism. I drove straight to the civil courthouse located just 3 blocks away from the county clerk building. I marched purposefully into the housing court division and firmly requested the immediate filing of an emergency eviction and removal notice. The civil clerk handed me a thick stack of official forms, and I filled them out with absolute ruthless precision. I explicitly listed Tasha Reed and Darnell Reed as unauthorized occupants illegally residing on my private property without my explicit permission. Because there was absolutely no formal lease agreement ever established between them and the offshore holding company, they had zero tenant rights under local state law. They were not official renters. They were legally classified as hostile squatters, illegally occupying a multi-million-dollar residential estate. In this specific legal jurisdiction, an owner could easily file an expedited 24-hour notice to vacate against unauthorized occupants, especially when presenting overwhelming proof of undisputed property ownership. I firmly attached the freshly stamped county deed and the signed transfer documents, completely establishing my absolute legal authority over the luxury premises in question. The paperwork was entirely flawless. The presiding civil magistrate reviewed my emergency filing within the hour. Seeing the pristine documentation and the complete lack of any existing lease agreement, the magistrate swiftly granted the strict legal order. I was handed a stack of brightly colored legal notices, officially commanding Tasha and Darnell to vacate the property immediately or face forcible physical removal by armed law enforcement. I took the authorized eviction orders and walked directly to the local sheriff department headquarters, situated right across the busy street. I needed this precise execution handled with absolute flawless timing. I approached the bustling duty desk and spoke directly with a seasoned sheriff deputy, handing over the court-ordered eviction paperwork. I explained clearly that I needed to formally schedule a physical lockout for a highly sensitive residential property. The deputy carefully reviewed the magistrate's signature and asked exactly when I wanted the tactical team to execute the removal. I looked the serious deputy directly in the eyes and requested that the physical lockout occur at exactly 8:30 on Saturday evening. I explained that the unauthorized occupants were extremely hostile, deeply entitled, and prone to emotionally volatile outbursts. I informed the deputy that I had fully confirmed through mutual family contacts that both occupants would be actively attending a lavish mandatory formal event at the Oakwood Heritage Country Club during that exact time window. I suggested that executing the lockout while the massive house was completely empty would ensure maximum safety for the responding officers and completely avoid any dangerous physical altercations or unnecessary domestic drama. The deputy nodded his head in firm agreement, deeply appreciating the strategic logistical planning I had provided. He confirmed that executing a civil lockout on an empty residence was standard protocol for minimizing potential violence. He officially scheduled the tactical eviction unit immediately. The armed officers would arrive at the sprawling Buckhead mansion exactly at 8:30. They would change every single exterior lock, secure the entire physical perimeter, and forcefully remove any remaining personal belongings out onto the public concrete curb. I paid the mandatory processing fees and sincerely thanked the deputy for his time. I walked back to my car feeling a profound sense of absolute lethal satisfaction coursing warmly through my veins. The federal and civil traps were now fully operational on every conceivable front. Tasha and Darnell had spent months bragging arrogantly to their entire elite social circle about their lavish new lifestyle. Tasha had proudly flaunted her expensive custom kitchen and her massive home theater, giving me condescending advice on how to be a more submissive, traditional wife. She had smugly thanked Julian for being the ultimate generous provider, completely ignoring the devastating facts of reality entirely. Her entire reality was built on the stolen foundation of my grandmother and her grueling lifetime of hard manual labor. Tasha and Darnell genuinely believed they were untouchable elite members of the city and its wealthy upper crust. They thought they could comfortably ride the golden coattails of Julian and his massive financial fraud forever without consequence. They had absolutely no idea they were actively living on borrowed, stolen time. At exactly 8:30 on Saturday night, while Tasha was sipping expensive imported champagne in her glittering designer gown at the country club, the local sheriff department would be dumping her extensive collection of designer shoes and luxury handbags directly onto the wet concrete. The heavy iron gates of her supposed kingdom would be chained and padlocked securely. She would receive the devastating phone call from her panicked neighbors right in the middle of the grand vow renewal, destroying her completely. She would realize in an instant that her entire glamorous existence was an absolute lie. She would have absolutely nowhere to go, no shelter to claim, and no assets to leverage. Darnell would be forced to face the humiliating reality that he could not provide a roof over his own head. They would be officially homeless, utterly disgraced, and entirely dependent on a brother who was simultaneously being arrested by federal agents for massive wire fraud. I sat in the driver's seat of my car watching the afternoon sun reflect off the tall glass buildings of the downtown financial district. Julian, Beatrice, Chloe, Tasha, and Darnell had formed a toxic parasitic alliance designed to drain my resources and destroy my family legacy. They had underestimated my intelligence, mocked my professional dedication, and treated my loyalty as a pathetic weakness to be ruthlessly exploited. They thought they were playing a brilliant game of high-stakes deception against a blind, obedient victim. They were completely unaware that the victim had quietly seized control of the entire board. I started the engine and merged back into the heavy city traffic. I had a grand vow renewal to attend on Saturday evening, and I needed to ensure my performance as the happy, oblivious bride was absolutely flawless. The dresses were purchased, the federal warrants were secured, the bank accounts were targeted, and the eviction was officially scheduled. The countdown to their absolute financial and social annihilation had officially begun, and I was going to savor every single agonizing second of their spectacular, inescapable destruction. Saturday evening descended upon the city with a crisp, clear elegance that perfectly matched the grandiose exterior of the Oakwood Heritage Country Club. The imposing wrought iron gates swung open to admit a steady stream of luxury vehicles, each polished to a mirror shine and driven by the wealthiest, most influential figures in the local African American high society. I sat perfectly still in the back of the sleek black limousine Julian had rented for our grand arrival, staring out the tinted windows at the sprawling, manicured lawns. The heavy, suffocating tulle of the hideous white gown Chloe had maliciously selected for me scratched aggressively against my skin, but I wore it like a battle general wearing the armor of a vastly underestimated opponent. Julian sat beside me, adjusting the lapels of his custom-tailored tuxedo and checking his expensive silver watch with a look of supreme, unchecked arrogance. He reached over, taking my hand in his, and offered me a blinding, camera-ready smile that completely failed to reach his cold, calculating eyes. He told me tonight was going to be the absolute pinnacle of our lives, a moment that would cement our legacy in this city forever. I smiled back warmly, squeezing his hand tightly, and agreed that nobody in this entire building would ever forget what was about to happen. The grand ballroom was a breathtaking spectacle of excessive, unadulterated wealth. Towering crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the sea of guests, dressed in stunning designer evening gowns and crisp, dark tuxedos. Massive floral arrangements of imported white orchids and cascading roses, expertly selected by Chloe to maximize the event budget, dominated every single table. Waiters in immaculate white uniforms circulated silently through the crowd, balancing silver trays loaded with premium vintage champagne and delicate, overpriced hors d'oeuvres. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes aged Scotch, and the intoxicating, palpable energy of the social elite networking vigorously among themselves. I glided through the heavy mahogany doors on Julian's arm, instantly besieged by a swarm of congratulations from his wealthy clients and our supposed friends. I scanned the room with the precise, methodical gaze of an apex predator assessing a trapped herd. I spotted Beatrice Caldwell immediately holding court near the towering 5-tier chocolate ganache wedding cake. She was draped in heavy, ostentatious diamonds that caught the chandelier light with every arrogant toss of her head. She was actively parading around a circle of highly influential women from her exclusive Jack and Jill social club, loudly bragging about her son's unmatched, phenomenal financial success. I listened as Beatrice boldly claimed that Julian possessed a brilliant, intuitive mind for wealth management that simply could not be taught. She told a group of wide-eyed investors that Julian practically carried the entire weight of the family economy on his broad shoulders, completely ignoring the fact that the actual bride standing 10 feet away had paid for his entire graduate education. Beatrice spotted me and offered a tight, patronizing smile, clearly delighted that I was trapped inside the horribly frumpy, outdated gown that made me look entirely subordinate to her dazzling, successful son. I offered her a polite nod, allowing her to bask in her fleeting imaginary victory. Tasha and Darnell were lingering near the premium open bar, loudly showing off digital photos of their new mansion to anyone polite enough to listen to their endless boasting. They were utterly oblivious to the fact that the local sheriff's tactical eviction unit was currently gearing up to throw their designer luggage directly onto the wet concrete of that very same property. At exactly 8:15 in the evening, the smooth jazz band abruptly stopped playing, and the massive room fell into a hushed, expectant silence. The master of ceremonies stepped up to the microphone, formally announcing the highly anticipated vow renewal speech. Julian released my hand, flashed a brilliant winning smile to the applauding crowd, and confidently strutted up the carpeted stairs to the elevated main stage. He stood behind the sleek acrylic podium, looking out over the sea of wealthy investors and elite socialites who trusted him entirely with their massive generational fortunes. The bright stage lights illuminated his handsome, treacherous face as he grabbed the microphone. Julian began delivering a sickeningly sweet, deeply narcissistic speech carefully designed to maximize his own public relations profile. He spoke in a low, resonant, theatrical voice, claiming that these past 5 years of marriage had been the absolute greatest blessing of his entire life. He looked directly at me, his eyes shining with fake manufactured adoration, and stated that a strong, successful man was nothing without a quiet, supportive woman standing firmly behind him. He spun a glorious, deceitful narrative about how his grueling, relentless hard work and unmatched dedication to his wealth management firm were entirely motivated by his deep desire to provide a beautiful, secure life for his family. He proudly gestured to his mother, Beatrice, thanking her for raising a king, and then pointed gracefully to Tasha and Darnell, noting how blessed he felt to share his tremendous financial blessings with his blood relatives. I stood perfectly still near the front of the stage, maintaining an expression of absolute radiant joy, while actively fighting the urge to vomit right onto the polished hardwood floor. I shifted my gaze slightly to the right, landing directly on Chloe Sterling. She was standing in the very front row wearing a slinky, skin-tight crimson dress that blatantly violated every unspoken rule of formal wedding etiquette. Chloe was gazing up at Julian with a sickeningly smug, territorial smirk playing across her glossy lips, while Julian was loudly professing his eternal loyalty to me. I watched as he made a quick, secret, deeply intimate eye contact with his mistress. It was a silent, arrogant confirmation of their shared malicious victory. They genuinely believed they were completely untouchable. They thought they had successfully manipulated the naive, hardworking wife into signing away her entire life savings and her sacred family home. They thought the offshore limited liability company was fully secured, and their grand tropical escape was just days away. Julian concluded his nauseating monologue by raising his glass of champagne to the ceiling, toasting to absolute loyalty, unwavering trust, and a future filled with boundless prosperity. The ballroom erupted into deafening, enthusiastic applause. The wealthy clients clapped aggressively, completely unaware that the man on the stage had actively embezzled their retirement funds to pay for the very champagne they were currently drinking. Julian gracefully descended the short staircase, the crowd parting respectfully to let the conquering hero return to his bride. He walked directly up to me, his chest puffed out with monumental pride, and smoothly handed the wireless microphone into my waiting hands. He leaned in close, his expensive cologne washing over me, and whispered for me to keep it brief and emotional. He fully expected me to weep. He expected me to cry hot, grateful tears of absolute submission in front of his elite peers, thanking him profusely for rescuing me from my ordinary working-class background. He wanted the perfect, tearful photo opportunity to seal his fraudulent public image forever. I gripped the cool metal of the microphone tightly in my right hand. The time for playing the compliant, ignorant victim was officially over. I took a very slow, deep, stabilizing breath, feeling the cold, clinical focus of the forensic accountant lock perfectly into place. I straightened my posture instantly, shedding the meek, submissive demeanor I had carefully maintained all week. I stood tall, squaring my shoulders and letting the blazing, lethal confidence radiate from my core. I looked out at the silent, expectant ballroom, my eyes locking onto Beatrice, then Tasha, then Chloe, and finally my treacherous husband. I raised my left hand slightly, catching the eye of the lead audio-visual technician standing in the shadows at the back of the room. I had heavily tipped that specific technician $1,000 in crisp, untraceable cash just 2 hours prior to ensure absolute, unquestioning compliance. I gave him the subtle, prearranged signal. The gentle ambient lighting in the ballroom immediately dimmed to pitch black, and the massive high-definition projector screen behind the stage hummed brightly to life. The sudden shift in illumination caused a collective confused murmur to ripple rapidly throughout the elegantly dressed crowd. Julian looked around in blind confusion, entirely unsure why his meticulously planned schedule was suddenly deviating from the script Chloe had created. He foolishly thought I had arranged a sweet romantic surprise video to honor him. I gripped the microphone tightly, staring straight ahead, feeling nothing but absolute unyielding power. The time for playing the faithful, oblivious wife was dead and buried forever. The heavy velvet curtain had finally dropped, exposing the ugly, rotting foundation of his fake, glamorous empire. The execution of his miserable, lying, thieving life was about to begin unfolding spectacularly before the entire elite world. The massive projector screen illuminated the darkened ballroom with a blinding flash of stark white light. The smooth jazz music had completely ceased, leaving only the soft hum of the expensive audio-visual equipment vibrating through the silent, highly expectant room. Julian turned toward the giant screen, his handsome face frozen in a look of mild, patronizing curiosity. He adjusted his silk tie, fully anticipating a heartwarming montage of our fake marital bliss. Instead, the very first image that materialized in crystal-clear high-definition resolution was a photograph captured just 5 days prior. It was a perfectly framed, undeniably explicit shot of Julian and Chloe Sterling passionately kissing in the dimly lit secluded booth of Le Petit Chateau. The image was massive, towering 20 feet high, projecting their adulterous betrayal for the entire elite world to witness. A sharp collective gasp ripped through the grand ballroom. Several wealthy socialites physically recoiled in sheer shock, their hands flying up to cover their mouths. The elegant crystal champagne flutes halted midair. I did not yell. I did not shed a single tear. I held the wireless microphone firmly in my left hand and spoke with the deadly absolute calm of a seasoned forensic accountant delivering a devastating audit report. I welcomed the esteemed guests to our 5-year vow renewal. I stated that Julian had just delivered a beautifully crafted speech about loyalty, dedication, and building a secure future for our family. I noted that his eloquent words were incredibly moving, especially considering that exactly 5 nights ago, he was aggressively kissing the woman hired to plan this very event. I pointed directly at Chloe, who was standing completely paralyzed in the front row, the color draining entirely from her smug, heavily contoured face. I explained that my husband and my former sorority sister had been carrying on an illicit clandestine affair for months, right under the oblivious noses of our entire social circle. Julian stumbled backward on the stage, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocated fish. He desperately waved his hands at the audio-visual booth, frantically shouting for the technician to cut the power and turn the lights back on. The technician, clutching my heavy cash tip in his pocket, completely ignored his desperate, sweating employer. I clicked the remote in my right hand, seamlessly transitioning to the next slide. The screen shifted from the scandalous restaurant photograph to a series of highly magnified, brightly illuminated text message screenshots. I had meticulously extracted these digital conversations from his securely encrypted laptop during my late-night forensic raid. The specific messages displayed on the screen were not just romantic declarations exchanged between two pathetic lovers. They were brutal, unfiltered assessments of his own flesh and blood. I read the glowing white text aloud, my voice echoing powerfully off the acoustic panels of the country club. I narrated how Julian complained to Chloe about his mother, Beatrice Caldwell. In his own undeniable digital words, he called the woman who raised him a shallow debt-ridden old bat who only cared about country club politics and maintaining a pathetic, hollow illusion of wealth just to impress Chloe. He brutally mocked her desperate need for social validation, laughing at how easily she could be manipulated as long as he kept funding her extravagant country club memberships and luxury lifestyle habits. The silence in the ballroom shattered instantly. Beatrice was standing near the towering chocolate wedding cake draped in her expensive diamonds. The delicate crystal glass she was holding slipped entirely through her trembling fingers, shattering violently against the polished hardwood floor. The sharp sound of breaking glass echoed like a gunshot. Beatrice clutched her chest, her eyes wide with monumental horror, staring up at the screen where her golden child had ruthlessly mocked her entire existence. She gasped for air, humiliated beyond all human comprehension in front of the very Jack and Jill socialites she had spent her entire life trying to endlessly impress. Her elite friends, the ones she had just been aggressively boasting to, backed away from her as if she carried a highly contagious disease. Tasha and Darnell stood frozen near the premium bar, their arrogant smirks completely eradicated, suddenly realizing the foundation of their entire luxurious lifestyle was actively burning to ashes right before their own eyes. They stared at Julian with pure, absolute hatred, realizing they were nothing more than convenient props in his elaborate, deceptive financial charade. Julian lunged toward me, his face twisted in absolute feral panic. He begged me to stop, his voice cracking with genuine, unadulterated terror. He tried to grab the microphone, but I smoothly stepped out of his reach, maintaining my cold, clinical distance. I told him to stand back and let me finish my presentation, warning him that his aggressive behavior was only making him look infinitely more guilty to the wealthy investors watching his epic mental breakdown. I reminded him that he wanted the entire city to witness his profound dedication tonight, and I was simply honoring his arrogant request to the fullest possible extent. I demanded that he remain perfectly silent while I exposed the final chapter of his meticulously crafted corporate deception. I clicked the remote again, plunging the entire room into the final, most destructive phase of his complete annihilation. The room held its collective breath, waiting for the ultimate, fatal blow to strike. The final slide illuminated the massive screen displaying a complex, highly detailed forensic financial flowchart. This was not a presentation of marital infidelity or petty family insults. This was a direct, undeniable map of a massive federal corporate crime. I adjusted my posture, scanning the faces of the wealthy investors, doctors, and corporate executives sitting in the audience. I told them to look very closely at the screen, specifically pointing out the offshore limited liability company registered in the Cayman Islands. I explained line by line exactly how Julian had been using his prestigious position as a senior wealth manager to systematically embezzle millions of dollars from the very VIP clients standing in this exact room tonight. I named specific dates, precise dollar amounts, and hidden routing numbers that matched their own private corporate portfolios, completely eliminating any possible doubt about the sheer magnitude of his financial treachery. I traced the digital red lines on the chart, showing how he siphoned their hard-earned retirement funds, their children's college savings, and their corporate investment portfolios directly into the fraudulent shell company. I exposed Chloe Sterling's active malicious complicity in the grand scheme. I detailed how she used her luxury real estate license to act as the fraudulent notary, legally shielding the stolen money through illicit property acquisitions, including the multi-million-dollar mansion currently occupied by Tasha and Darnell. I revealed that the very champagne they were drinking, the imported orchids on their tables, and the expensive jazz band playing in the corner were all entirely funded by their own stolen, laundered money. I projected the forged documents displaying the fake signatures Chloe had illegally validated, destroying her professional real estate career instantly. I made it undeniably clear that they were actively swimming in a massive pool of their own embezzled cash. Absolute, uncontrolled panic erupted instantly among the wealthy guests. The realization hit them with the devastating force of a speeding freight train. Their money was completely gone. The dignified, sophisticated facade of the Oakwood Heritage Country Club vanished in a fraction of a second. Powerful corporate executives began shouting aggressively, demanding immediate answers from the treacherous man standing on the stage. Wealthy socialites frantically pulled out their cell phones, desperately attempting to log into their banking applications to check their drained investment portfolios. Julian stood trembling on the stage, visibly sweating through his custom-tailored tuxedo, entirely unable to offer a single word of defense against the flawless, irrefutable forensic evidence I had just publicly presented. The trap had officially sprung, and the absolute devastation was beautifully, completely inescapable for everyone involved in this incredibly massive, fraudulent enterprise tonight. The room dissolved into sheer madness, exactly as I had meticulously planned and mathematically calculated from the very beginning. The elite crowd transformed into an angry mob, surging forward toward the stage with completely unchecked fury. Doctors and corporate lawyers screamed obscenities at Julian, demanding their stolen savings back immediately. Chloe attempted to slink backward into the heavy shadows, desperately trying to escape the furious glares of the defrauded guests. A group of wealthy alumni forcefully blocked her only exit path, staring her down with absolute disgust. Beatrice remained collapsed on the polished floor, sobbing uncontrollably, as her societal empire disintegrated into worthless dust. I stood perfectly still amidst the deafening chaos, holding the heavy wireless microphone, with absolute steady grace, watching them all burn. As I stood amidst the wreckage of Julian's carefully constructed empire, the sharp, frantic ringing of a cell phone pierced the residual shock of the ballroom. The sound originated from the premium open bar area. Tasha was staring at her glowing screen with absolute confusion. Darnell peered over her shoulder as she answered the call. I watched her perfectly made-up face contort from mild irritation into sheer unadulterated panic within a matter of seconds. The caller was her affluent next-door neighbor in the heavily gated Buckhead community. The neighbor was hysterically informing Tasha that heavily armed officers from the local sheriff tactical unit had just descended upon her pristine property. The deputies had completely bypassed the security gates, executed a highly expedited civil lockout, and were currently dragging every single piece of her expensive designer furniture directly onto the wet concrete of the public curb. The neighbor reported that her luxury handbags, her custom velvet sofas, and Darnell's massive flat-screen televisions were currently sitting in the rain. Tasha dropped her expensive phone, the device clattering loudly against the polished hardwood floor. She let out a visceral, piercing scream that completely paralyzed the remaining country club guests. She lunged forward, her manicured claws extended, trying to reach her brother as the federal agents were actively escorting him out the heavy mahogany doors. Tasha shrieked at the top of her lungs, demanding to know what Julian had done to her beautiful multi-million-dollar mansion. She aggressively grabbed the lapels of his custom tuxedo, screaming that the sheriff had just formally evicted them and completely changed all the exterior locks. She wailed that she and Darnell were officially homeless with absolutely nowhere to go. Julian, completely broken and heavily shackled in cold steel handcuffs, could only stare back at his sister with wide, terrified eyes, entirely unable to comprehend the massive scope of my legal retaliation. He had genuinely believed his stolen real estate assets were perfectly secure. He had no idea that I possessed the signed irrevocable transfer deed legally establishing my sole ownership of the sprawling estate, giving me the absolute authority to order their immediate, ruthless eviction tonight. Tasha turned her furious, tear-stained face toward Darnell, violently slapping his chest and cursing him for being a completely useless, unemployed leech who could not even provide a basic roof over her entitled head. Darnell shouted back bitterly, reminding her that her precious golden child brother was nothing but a pathetic, fraudulent criminal who had just destroyed their entire luxurious existence. The picture-perfect, deeply arrogant Caldwell family was instantly turning on each other like vicious, starving wild animals trapped inside a collapsing cage. Their pristine facade of elite generational wealth had officially shattered into millions of sharp, irreparable pieces right in front of the most influential African-American socialites in the entire city. Beatrice, who had been sitting collapsed and hyperventilating near the ruined five-tier chocolate wedding cake, finally managed to stagger to her feet. She looked absolutely horrific. Her expensive designer gown was heavily wrinkled. Her immaculate makeup was completely ruined by her hysterical sobbing, and her heavy diamond necklace hung crookedly against her trembling collarbone. She stumbled toward me, her eyes filled with a toxic mixture of profound shock, utter disbelief, and helpless, pathetic rage. She raised a shaking manicured finger, opening her mouth to undoubtedly hurl another string of vicious, condescending insults about my working-class background. I did not give her the opportunity to speak a single hateful word. I calmly reached down and smoothly slid the heavy, expensive diamond engagement ring off my left hand. I stepped directly into her personal space, holding the glittering, deceitful piece of jewelry out toward her. I looked deep into her devastated, tear-filled eyes, projecting nothing but absolute freezing confidence. I firmly pressed the diamond ring directly into her trembling palm. I kept my voice incredibly steady, ensuring my words echoed with final lethal clarity over the chaotic shouting voices of her ruined family. I told her that she had always proudly declared I was simply not cut out for this specific family. I offered her a sharp, predatory smile, stating that for once in her miserable, incredibly shallow life, she was absolutely right. I turned my back on Beatrice Caldwell forever, leaving her standing entirely alone amidst the complete, devastating wreckage of her precious social empire. I walked slowly and purposefully out of the grand, chaotic ballroom, my head held remarkably high. The heavy double mahogany doors of the Oakwood Heritage Country Club swung shut behind me, instantly silencing the frantic, miserable screams of the treacherous people who had foolishly attempted to completely destroy my life. I stepped out onto the wide, sweeping stone veranda, taking a deep, profoundly restorative breath of the crisp, cool night air. The heavy rain had finally stopped, leaving the dark, cloudy sky smelling brilliantly fresh and remarkably clean. I walked down the grand, sweeping staircase, moving with the immense, undeniable grace of a woman who had successfully executed the most brilliant high-stakes financial retaliation imaginable. The hideous, scratchy white tulle dress no longer felt like a suffocating, humiliating costume. It felt exactly like the glorious, triumphant armor of an absolutely undefeated warrior. I approached my sleek, unassuming vehicle parked discreetly in the vast, luxurious lot. I unlocked the door, sliding behind the comfortable leather steering wheel with a deep, satisfying sigh of relief. I was completely secure in my heavily guarded finances. I had protected my hard-earned retirement accounts, maintained my professional reputation, and reclaimed the sacred ancestral home my grandmother had entrusted to my care. They say hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, but I say hell hath no fury like a black woman who knows how to read a bank statement. Have you ever used your professional skills to take down a toxic family member? Drop your story in the comments below, and do not forget to like and subscribe.